Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for coming to class tonight. Tonight, we are going to be discussing let me rephrase. We're going to continue working with the buyer and we're going to be discussing the counteroffer versus the addendum and when to use which one. So let's go ahead and begin. Just a reminder, this class is recorded. Please keep all questions pertaining to the material that we're discussing tonight and any other questions that you might have, please feel free to answer after the class is over. So when you are representing either a buyer or seller and you're negotiating something in the contract and the original terms of the purchase contract that was submitted, if the original terms of the contract was submitted and maybe you don't agree with them or the seller wants to counter, usually because there's no executed contract, the counteroffer is used. So that is why the counteroffer is chosen over an addendum in this case, because a counteroffer is done because you're negotiating the original terms of the purchase contract that was submitted. So this is what the counteroffer looks like. They are numbered, so there can be multiple counteroffers, and every time a counteroffer is submitted, usually by the seller, because the seller's received a contract from a buyer and the seller doesn't agree to the terms, they're going to issue the counteroffer. The original purchase contract is still signed and then the counteroffer is submitted. So you have to number the counteroffer. So the first one, of course, is counteroffer 1. You can also have counteroffer A, B, C. It doesn't necessarily have to be a number, just as long as it's consistent. Typically, though, we use numbers. So for training purposes tonight, we're going to go ahead and start with counteroffer 1. This counteroffer originated by, well, who's originating it? It's going to typically be the seller that is originating it, again, because they're the ones that received the purchase contract from the buyer's agent. However, sometimes maybe the seller's agent is unavailable to type up a counteroffer, and maybe she's had a conversation with the buyer's agent and the buyer's agent said, I can go ahead and type it up for us. In that case, you would check buyer. So for training purposes, we're going to check seller because that is usually who is typing counteroffer 1. This is a counteroffer to the offer, or is it a counteroffer to a counteroffer? Regardless, the date is the date the purchase contract was executed and signed by both parties, meaning, let's say the purchase contract was delivered to the seller's agent yesterday, which was January 15th, but the seller didn't actually sign it until today. That means that it was executed today because both parties signed it. And this is a counteroffer to the original offer. The seller and the buyer's info, of course, would be typically auto-populated because you've already done the purchase contract. So just for training purposes, seller Tina Nerland, buyer Mike Vaughn. And of course, the premises address should have auto-populated, but if it didn't, go ahead and put it in. Oops, I'm typing tonight. And then what kind of items can you put in the counteroffer? It can be really anything, anything that was in the original purchase contract that maybe the seller wants to renegotiate. So purchase price. Maybe you had it listed for 500, the offer came in at 490. You want to counter them at 495. So purchase price to be 495. Maybe the close of escrow was too late. Maybe they asked for a 2-month close of escrow. So you change it. Let's say the seller had noted in the listing that the agent was related to the seller. That should have been acknowledged in the original purchase contract when the offer was written, but maybe it wasn't. So we need to acknowledge that. Oops. Another thing that could be noted in here is, let's say in the listing, they stated that the Ring doorbell camera does not convey. And again, it wasn't put in the original offer, so you need to clarify that in the counteroffer that buyer acknowledges that the Ring camera does not convey. Okay. What other things could be in a counteroffer? Really, typically anything that you want to renegotiate or clarify. Another thing that could be done on this counteroffer could be maybe the agent forgot to check that there's a seller compensation addendum, because that does have to be notated in the original contract. And I believe it's line 36, SCA to be checked. Stuff like that. So you can pretty much put anything in the counter offer that wasn't in the original purchase contract that you want to negotiate or even clean up, verify, or clarify. Once you've got your items done in the counter offer, you can put all other terms and conditions to remain the same. That just means that nothing else, one, can be added underneath because it states everything remains the same, and that no other changes to the original contract can be made on this form, at least. You definitely want to put a stop time. So how much time are you going to give them to either accept or counter this counter offer? Typically, I do, if it's early in the morning, I might do 9 o'clock or 10 o'clock at night. If it's late at night, I'll give them until the evening of the next day. So let's just say tomorrow, 5 p.m. And then again, who originated it, seller or the buyer. And then, depending on how they're going to respond, are they going to do an additional counter offer, or are they going to accept this? So let's say you've got the original purchase contract. You wanted to renegotiate terms on a counter offer. You have to understand that once a counter offer is initiated and sent to the opposing party, the original terms of the purchase contract are null and void until the counter offer is signed and accepted. Hopefully that makes sense, because it is very important to know that once a counter offer is initiated and delivered, you cannot go back and say, oops, so sorry, just kidding. We'll go back and we'll accept the original terms of the offer. You can't do that. You would have to do another counter offer, doing like an extension of an acceptance time. So until all parties accept the counter offer or counter offer 2, counter offer 3, whatever it might be, you do not have a valid contract. So let's say, for training purposes, the buyer doesn't agree with these terms and they want to issue a new counter offer. Totally acceptable. So what would that look like? Let me just delete this real quick. Okay. So we have the original purchase contract, we have counteroffer 1, and now the opposing party is saying, well, I don't necessarily agree with counteroffer 1. I want to give another counter. So you're going to label it counteroffer 2. And if the seller originally did the other one, it's probably the opposing party this time, so the buyer. The counteroffer is not to the offer anymore. It's now to the counteroffer. And that counteroffer is dated whatever date both parties signed it. So for training purposes, let's go ahead and say it wasn't accepted until the 17th. Okay, all this information should have auto-populated. Let's say they said, okay, the original purchase contract said X, Y, and Z. The counteroffer one said X, Y, and Z, but this is what I don't agree with. Maybe they're fine with the purchase price, but maybe they want the close of escrow to be 2/8 instead of 2014. All other terms and conditions to remain the same. So the only thing they recountered us on was the close of escrow. So you have the original terms of the original contract. You've got the terms on the counteroffer. And now you have the new term of the counteroffer too, but the only change was close of escrow to be a new date. So that means that all the original terms in the original contract with the changes of counteroffer 1 and now the change on counteroffer 2, if this is signed by all parties, in the agreed amount of time, they respond by 1/17, that is your executed contract. So close of escrow will be 2/8/2025. All of the items that we had on our counteroffer 1, with the exception of the close of escrow, is valid. And then any changes on that any changes on that counteroffer 1 override anything that it changed from the original contract. So it's very important to have a paper trail. And there's a reason why we want that, because we want to see, okay, the original terms were X, Y, and Z. Counteroffer 1 said X, Y, and Z. Counteroffer 2 trumped anything on counteroffer 1. So it's like a paper trail. So hopefully that all makes sense. So the biggest thing of tonight's training class is when to use a counteroffer versus addendum. So let's take a look at what an addendum looks like real quick. It's very similar, and a lot of people get confused of, well, when should I use a counteroffer and when should I use an addendum? And it's kind of a very simple answer because they are very similar forms. You have the number of what addendum it is. You have who initiated it, and this addendum is to the contract dated. For training purposes, the last executed counteroffer was our contract date. So it was January 17th. So you had the original signed purchase contract, then you had counteroffer 1, and then counteroffer 2 was signed last. That's your contract date. Because before that, until all parties agreed to the terms and conditions, you didn't have a fully executed quote unquote contract. So January 17th is the executed contract date. Seller, buyer, premises, this should have all auto-populated. And sorry, I must have had this written in there from the last training class, but let me delete that. So when do you use an addendum versus the counteroffer? It's very simple. If you do not have a fully executed contract, you use the counteroffer. But now that we have an executed contract, because we've come to and we've agreed on terms in the counteroffers, if I need to make any changes moving forward, I'm going to use an addendum. An addendum can be used very similar to the counteroffer, but again, it's because we have an executed contract, and that's why we use the addendum. But you can still change items on an addendum that will trump anything in the original offer or the counteroffer. So for example, let's say you are under contract and you've got the home inspection done, and the buyers say, well, there's a lot of repairs that need to be done, and we would like to ask for a seller concession for repairs. So you've already negotiated that in the Binzer, and so an addendum has to be typed up. You know, who's typing it up, seller or buyer? And you can just type up seller concession to be Let's say 5,000. Maybe that's all they ask for. So then all other terms and conditions to remain the same. All parties sign it, it's executed, it now becomes part of the contract. Because you have an addendum and it changes terms of the original purchase contract and counteroffer, you have to make sure that all parties involved in the transaction get a copy of it. Title, lender, buyer, seller's agent, whoever it might be, as soon as it's executed by all parties, you have to email it over to all the parties of the contract. Okay, so then let's say you're through the inspection, the home doesn't appraise. And remember, our purchase price was $495,000. So let's say it appraised for $490,000. And you've gone back and forth with the opposing party and you all agree that the purchase price is now going to be $490,000. Maybe it underappraised for $5,000. And let's say to compensate for that, we now are removing the seller concession. So purchase price to be $490,000. Seller concession to be 0. All other terms and conditions to remain the same. Once it's fully executed, make sure the lender and title gets a copy of it. And the reason being is because you have now changed terms of the original contract and counteroffers. So it was a very short class tonight, but the reason why I wanted to have this class is because we are seeing a lot more counteroffers coming through, and we're definitely seeing more addendums coming through because we're able to negotiate a lot more in this market than we were before. So, reminder, when you use a counteroffer, it is because you do not have a fully executed contract. You use an addendum after you have an executed contract. Does anyone have any questions? Great. Well, thank you so much for coming to class tonight. This will be uploaded to my YouTube channel at Tina Nerland. So keep an eye out for it, because if you came late, you may have missed a small bit of the class, but not much at all. And hopefully you got something out of the class. Thank you so much for coming. Have a great evening. Let me know if you have any questions.